No Man's Sky is dropped like a sack of lead-filled potatoes on a cold day in hell, and as expected, fans and anti-fans are frothing at the mouth. Let's chat about it in the comments, but first, my opinion, and holy hell, that clickbait title, am I right? Don't worry, I'll explain. My name is Tarmack, and this is Feature Creep. Okay, a couple of quick clarifications. When I say fans and anti-fans, I mean the fringe. I'm not including the majority in this, but rather just talking about those who give the impression that they're spending more time hyping or dumping on No Man's Sky than they have or will ever spend playing it. And second, when I say that No Man's Sky is probably illegal, what I'm actually referring to is how the game was released and marketed, not the fact that the game exists and is somehow illegal on that basis. I'll have some links to the documents I quote down below. Let's jump into it. There are a lot of rules in the vast majority of first world countries where it comes to making a thing and subsequently selling the thing to someone else. These rules are usually referred to by the phrase consumer protection, and they've always got a nice piece on advertising and marketing. Be aware, if you're not already, that advertising and marketing are not the same thing. Marketing includes advertising, but also other things as well. So, in the general sense, you can apply a very simple piece of logic to the business and consumer relationship. When I, as a business, tell you that you should buy a thing from me, I don't get to lie to you. I can't tell you that it does something that it won't do. I can't lie by omission or leave out important details because I know the details could make you question the purchase. With a global market like gaming, determining compliance with the law can be a bit tricky at times. There are a lot of cross-jurisdictional issues at play when you're a company based out of the UK but selling your product through an online storefront owned by a company out of the US. However, many of the rules we're discussing here are for the most part the same or very similar. You won't find many countries with laws that permit companies lying about their product, whether actively or by omitting important details. Hello Games is based out of the UK and they sell No Man's Sky in the UK, so we can use this as our base case study. The issue at play is a document from the European Union called the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, at least until the UK has officially left the EU, which is still an unknown date right now, and the Control of Misleading Advertisements Regulations 1988, which is UK legislation. And don't worry, we're just about done with the dry stuff. In the directive, they define something called a commercial practice. That means, and I'll just quote the definition here, any act, omission, course of conduct, or representation, commercial communication, including advertising and marketing, by a trader directly connected with the promotion, sale, or supply of a product to consumers. The directive goes on to say that misleading commercial practices are prohibited and says that they'll be considered misleading if they contain false information, is untruthful in any way, and deceives or is likely to deceive the average consumer even if the information is factually correct, which is a hell of an interesting phrase that we'll come back to. There's obviously a lot more to the directive, which is why lawyers get paid more money than the rest of us, but I've got enough now to make my point and stop putting people watching this video to sleep. The reason I wanted to explain the definition of a commercial practice is that a lot of people will go down the road of developer interviews are not advertisements. And that's correct. However, they are commercial practices as they are acts directly connected with the promotion of a product to consumers. I need to establish this point because a significant amount of the deception surrounding No Man's Sky comes from interviews and other non-traditional advertisements. You're not going to find a YouTube advert for No Man's Sky that claims it has multiplayer combat, for example. Now, I did not do the breadth of research on every single item where Hello Games, and more specifically Sean Murray, made a claim that turned out to be false. There was a deleted account on Reddit that put up a huge number of them, all very well sourced, and several other YouTubers that have pointed very well to specific things said by Hello Games which are a problem. My intention here is to draw them all under a single umbrella. Remember that what we're talking about is the average consumer, and primarily I want to address the major issues. When a developer says they will be attacked by AI, potentially, very rarely, other players, things like that, if they cross paths with them, this, to an average consumer, indicates a multiplayer system of some kind and suggests a PvP structure. When asked if you can play with your friends and you say yes, the average consumer would believe this to mean multiplayer. When asked if you can grief other players and the answer is a little bit, it pushes the same message. When two players find the same location but cannot see or interact with each other, and still, rather than confirming or denying outright that this should be possible, you say on Twitter, quote, "We added a scan for other players in the galactic map to try to encourage this happening. We wanted it to happen, but the first day? We want people to be aware that they're in a shared universe. We added online features and some Easter eggs to create cool moments. We hope to see those happening, but too many of you are playing right now, more than we could have predicted." End quote. The implication here is that the functionality is there. It's just not working because the servers are overloaded. At least, that's what it looks like to the average consumer. Multiplayer is not an inconsequential feature to push for your game. Rather, it's a feature entire game genres, including survival games, are based around. The fact of the matter is that the game has no multiplayer, but has in numerous instances in the past, including all the way up until right after launch, been heavily implied, and some would argue outright confirmed, by the developer. Now, there are a ton of other little examples, each of them completely inconsequential on their own. Things like planets not having unique resources depending on their proximity to a local star. This doesn't really matter, right? Well, except that the sheer volume of these inconsequential claims point to a game with much more depth and complexity than ended up being released. I see this as the SimCity problem. Every sim was supposed to have been individually calculated in every way, including its day-to-day activities, which is why we had to have an online-only system. Except that when it came right down to brass tacks, the background system was not even in the same realm as that complex, and gamers had essentially been lied to. The same is true here with No Man's Sky. All of these elements paint a consistent narrative of a complex space exploration game and are each, in their own way, misleading. The nature of the product presented by Hello Games is different from the reality of the game that was actually released. I've heard a number of places in comments referring to Sean Murray as the next Peter Molyneux, and I suppose they have a point. We have two name-driven developers who make large amounts of grandiose statements about a game that they're building, which end up not making the final cut, whether for budgetary reasons or simply the impossibility of the promised task. I think that there's a difference in conviction, though. Molyneux would not hesitate to promise multiplayer where there would end up being none. In fact, he didn't hesitate to promise that Goddess would have multiplayer, which never happened. Meanwhile, Murray seems to have better control to avoid going too far. The problem is, when you speak in such vague terms as he does, deception becomes far more likely. Remember the phrase that I said we'd come back to? That a commercial practice is deemed misleading and prohibited if it deceives or is likely to deceive the average consumer, even if the information is factually correct. Murray can say that you can play with your friends because he didn't say at the same time. He can say that you can grief your friends, or that they wanted people to be able to discover other players, because he didn't directly confirm that these things would happen in the game engine itself. Consumer protection is all about the average consumer, the person who doesn't follow gaming news or pundits, the person who may only read one article on a game before deciding to buy it. And the fact of the matter is that through both major obfuscations and a significant number of minor ones, the overall presentation of No Man's Sky from a marketing and commercial practice perspective is misleading and deceptive. And to make matters worse, Hello Games had a major publisher backing the marketing effort, one that would have been involved in the coaching of Murray on how best to promote the game, what he can and cannot say, like for example the word Xbox, which he essentially confirmed in his Reddit Ask Me Anything thread. A company that cannot fall back on the excited developer who didn't know better excuse. It's not to say that I believe the excuse is valid though, even for indies. At the end of it all, dear friends, Romans and garden gnomes alike, I believe that in the UK, by European Union rules and the UK's own legislation, and in any country with a similar rule set, the marketing push for No Man's Sky, and specifically coming directly from Hello Games founder Sean Murray, is illegal. It is grounded in misleading comments about the capabilities of the product, deceptive to people well versed in the game industry goings-on, but also just as deceptive to the average consumer. I believe that if a review were conducted, they would lose. I enjoy indie games and indie developers, and when it comes right down to it, I think that a certain amount of additional rope needs to be provided to them. They don't all have big legal teams, and sometimes their mouth gets ahead of their brain. And this is normal human behavior, and quite frankly, for the most part, it comes from a desire to put out the best product possible. No Man's Sky, however, has such a long list of complexity and depth promised, including major and minor features which are clearly not just broken but absent entirely. It's snake oil. It doesn't do the thing that consumers were led to believe that it would do in a lot of ways. And it was backed by a major game publisher who knew damn well what was going on. Both Hello Games and Sony deserve all of the reasonable and logical backlash that they get from this game. And if it happens to hit the radar of advertising standards associations, they deserve all the legal backlash too. I don't begrudge any players who have picked up the game and are enjoying it. If you have and you love it, then I'm happy for you. It's entirely possible for a product to be misleading and still be enjoyed. So, what do you think about the whole No Man's Sky marketing structure? Let's chat about it in the comments. Please do subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content, or even if you don't, you just like raking me over the coals in the comments on a semi-regular basis. That's all I have to say. Tarmack out.